It is 11:30 p.m. The San Mateo fog is thick, swallowing the streetlights. A woman sits in her car, the engine idling, the heater humming. She is just blocks from home. She feels safe. But someone is watching from the shadows of the parking lot, someone who has been waiting for this exact moment. In the morning, the car is still there. The engine is cold. But the driver is gone, leaving behind only a single, haunting clue that would baffle detectives for nearly half a century. What happened to Kathy Zimmer in those missing hours? And why did it take 48 years for the truth to finally crawl out of the darkness? Tonight, we're going inside 5 of California's most disturbing cold cases. Cases that were buried. Cases that were ignored. Cases that haunt the families who lived them. Stay with us, because case number 5, the mystery of the Santa Rosa hitchhikers, will leave you absolutely speechless. Case number 1. Kathy Zimmer. Kathy Zimmer was the kind of person who anchored everyone around her. At 38 years old, she was a mother of 2, a dedicated student at San Mateo College, and a woman who never missed a beat in her daily routine. She had a smile that felt like home, and a future that was just beginning to open up. On the morning of March 8, 1982, she dropped her kids off, headed to her classes, and prepared for a routine day of lectures and library runs. Nothing in Kathy's life suggested what was coming, until that afternoon. The timeline begins at 2 p.m. Kathy finishes her last class. She walks to her light blue Chrysler Cordoba. At 3 p.m., she has a scheduled appointment with a physical therapist. She never shows up. By 5 p.m., her husband, David, is worried. By 8 p.m., the worry turns to a gut-wrenching panic. The police start a search, but the night is silent. 2 days later, the silence breaks. A passerby notices her car parked in the long-term lot at San Francisco International Airport. The doors are locked. The keys are missing. And in the back seat, wrapped in a colorful handmade quilt, lay Kathy. She had been strangled. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows. It was as if she had simply pulled over for someone she knew. And then silence. Detectives were hit with a wall of mystery. The quilt she was wrapped in? It didn't belong to Kathy. It was a distinctive, hand-stitched pattern that no one in her family recognized. Police processed the car for prints, but it had been wiped clean. They looked at the husband, David. They looked at her friends. Everyone had an alibi, but no one had a motive. One forensic detail stood out. A single hair was found on the quilt. In 1982, DNA testing was a fantasy. They bagged it, tagged it, and watched as the case turned into a block of ice. Decades passed. Files gathered dust, but the San Mateo Sheriff's Office never truly let go. They knew the killer had left a signature. They just didn't have the technology to read it yet. But here is where the case takes a turn that nobody saw coming. For 30 years, the prime suspect was a ghost. Then, in 2014, detectives used advanced forensic techniques on that old handmade quilt. They didn't find a stranger. They found a family secret. The DNA on that quilt? It pointed directly to Kathy's own brother-in-law, Robert Zimmer. For 3 decades, the man who sat at the family dinner table, who mourned with Kathy's children, was the one who had discarded her like trash in an airport parking lot. In 2014, Robert Zimmer was finally arrested. However, the victory was bittersweet. Robert died in prison before he could ever explain why he did it. Kathy's children grew up without a mother, and the why went to the grave with her killer. Do you think justice is served when a killer dies behind bars? Or is the lack of a confession a final insult to the family? Leave your thoughts below. Our next case takes us to San Francisco, and this one involves a young boy who disappeared into thin air in broad daylight. Case number 2, Kevin Collins. Kevin Collins was just 10 years old in 1984. He was a shy boy with a shock of brown hair and a love for basketball. He was one of 9 children in a tight-knit family. He wasn't a rebel. He was the kid who stayed close to home. The 10th of February 1984, 6 p.m. Kevin is leaving basketball practice at Kevin's Catholic school. He tells his brother he'll catch the bus home. He's seen standing on the corner of Oak and Stanyan streets. A witness sees him talking to a man with a large black dog. At 6:30 p.m., the bus arrives. But Kevin never gets on. That was the last time anyone saw Kevin alive. The search was massive. Kevin's face was one of the first to appear on milk cartons across America. Police followed thousands of leads. They searched the park, the sewers, the bay. They looked into a local identity, a man known for hanging around the school, but he vanished shortly after Kevin did. The twist came years later. In 2013, a tip led police to a concrete floor in a San Francisco basement. They tore it up, convinced Kevin was there. They found bones. The city held its breath. But the bones weren't human. They were animal. The man with the black dog, from 1984, remains the most terrifying shadow in San Francisco history. Kevin has never been found. His mother still keeps his room ready, just in case. If you were in San Francisco in 1984, do you remember the man with the dog? Your comment could be the one that sparks a memory. Coming up, Case 3. A high achiever whose life was cut short in her own home. Stay with us. Case number 3. Kelly Ralston. Kelly Ralston was 22, beautiful and brilliant. She was a senior at UC Riverside, just months away from graduation. She was the light of her parents' lives. The 1st of March, 1977. It was a Tuesday. Kelly was in her off-campus apartment, studying. At 10 p.m., neighbors heard a muffled scream. They didn't call the police. They thought it was a TV. The next morning, Kelly's boyfriend found her. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her apartment was a bloodbath. The investigation was a nightmare. There was no forced entry. Kelly had let someone in. Police looked at everyone. Her boyfriend, her classmates, even her professors. One man, a local handyman, had a strange obsession with her, but they couldn't tie him to the scene. The twist? In 2022, DNA from the original crime scene DNA that had been stored in a freezer for 45 years was finally run through a genealogy database. It didn't lead to a criminal. It led to a man who had lived a perfectly normal life, married with children, just a few miles from where Kelly was killed. He died of natural causes 2 years before the DNA match came back. He escaped justice by 24 months. The case is technically closed by exception, but for Kelly's family, there is no closure. They never got to see him in handcuffs. Do you think DNA technology is moving fast enough? Or are we losing too many killers to old age? Let's talk in the comments. Our next case is perhaps the most famous mystery in Hollywood history, a tragedy on the dark water. Case 4. Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood was Hollywood royalty, a 3-time Oscar nominee, a mother, a woman who, despite her fame, was deathly afraid of dark water. She once told an interviewer that her greatest fear was drowning. She was the most vulnerable she had ever been on the night of the 28th of November, 1981. The setting is a yacht called the Splendor off Catalina Island. On board, Natalie, her husband Robert Wagner, and her co-star Christopher Walken. The atmosphere was thick with tension and alcohol. At 11:05 p.m., Robert Wagner says he went to bed and Natalie was gone. At 8 a.m. the next morning, her body was found floating a mile away, wearing a nightgown and a down jacket. The initial investigation was a tragic accident. They said she tried to tie off a dinghy, slipped, and drowned. But the captain of the boat, Dennis Davern, later changed his story. He said there was a massive fight between Wagner and Wood. He said Wagner waited hours before calling for help. In 2011, the case was reopened. The coroner changed the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Why? Because Natalie's body was covered in fresh bruises, bruises that occurred before she hit the water. Robert Wagner has been named a person of interest, but no charges have ever been filed. He is now in his 90s. This case is the definition of a Hollywood cover-up. What do you think happened on the Splendor? Was it an accident, or was it something much darker? One more case. Case 5. I saved this one for last, because of all the cases in California that have haunted me. This is the one I cannot stop thinking about. Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. Between 1972 and 1973, 7 young women disappeared in Sonoma County. They weren't runaways. They were students, daughters, and friends. Girls like 1-3 year. old Yvonne Weber and Kim Wendy Miller. They were just trying to get home. Nothing in their lives deserved the horror that was waiting on the roadside. The pattern was terrifying. Each girl was hitchhiking, a common practice in the 70s. They would vanish, and months later, their bodies would be found in embankments or ravines near the highway. They were all found nude. They were all posed. Each crime was a message, and the message was, "I am watching." Police were overwhelmed. Was it the Zodiac? Was it Ted Bundy? Both were active in the area. They found a single chip of a tooth at one scene that didn't belong to the victim. They found tire tracks. But in 1973, without CCTV or GPS, the killer was a ghost in a car, disappearing into the winding roads of Northern California. The most shocking detail? Every single victim was missing one earring. The killer kept them as trophies. And here is the gut punch. In 2011, DNA was finally tested on a hair found with one of the victims. It didn't match any known serial killer. It suggests the Santa Rosa killer wasn't a famous monster, he was someone's neighbor. Someone who might still be alive today. 7 murders, 0 arrests. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer is one of the most prolific unidentified serial killers in American history. If you are watching from Sonoma County, you may actually know someone who lived through this era. You might have seen that car. You might have seen those earrings. The families are still waiting. The girls are still gone. And the killer? He might be sitting in a rocking chair right now, watching the sun set over the same hills where he left his victims. 5 cases. 5 families still waiting for answers. 5 names that deserve to be remembered. Kathy Zimmer, Kevin Collins, Kelly Ralston, Natalie Wood, and the victims of Santa Rosa. These are not just stories. These are real people, real families, real pain that never goes away. If any of these cases affected you, tell us in the comments. Which case shocked you the most? Do you think the Santa Rosa killer is still out there? Your engagement helps keep these cases active in the public eye. And if you want more, we cover a new U.S. state every single week. California was just the beginning.